Our story begins with a man waiting for the airport expansion. Officials were going door to door to measure houses for compensation, yet he waited 3 months. Not a single soul knocked on his door, and only later did he discover that on the planning map, his land had been intentionally excluded. Naturally, he went to find answers in a fit of rage, only to be told that the plan was final and nothing could be done. His neighbors even mocked him, saying he'd be stuck with that old house forever, but Fu Qing didn't just give up and complain. Instead, he took his life savings, secured a loan to reach 10 million, and 6 months later, his old house became a 10-story building. He hung a sign for the Cloud Hotel, and the no entry for non-customers notice became the most striking sight at the entire airport. We see that once news of the airport spread, our quiet town of Anning was no longer peaceful, as talk of compensation filled the air. Relocation and future lives became eternal topics, while white vans from the demolition office shuttled back and forth on the dirt roads. Staff members carried tape measures and notebooks to every house, and this is where we meet our protagonist, Fu Qing. He lived at the eastern edge of town in a 2-story old house. Since his parents passed away, he had lived there all alone. On the first day, the demolition office car drove right past his door. He assumed they were simply starting from the west side first. A week later, his neighbor Li Shen settled his deal for a large sum and couldn't stop smiling, loudly asking Fu Qing about his own progress. Fu Qing would just smile and nod, but by the first month, even the other eastern residents were signing their contracts one by one. Soon, the town walls were covered in the red character for demolish, yet the walls of his own home remained strangely clean and gray. He began to feel a sense of panic as 2 more months passed, and most of the townspeople had already moved away. With an ominous feeling spreading in his heart, he went to the town government to find the mayor, Zheng Daqian, who was busy on the phone. When Fu Qing pushed the door open, the mayor only looked up with an impatient glance, asking what he wanted. Fu Qing asked directly about the airport demolition and why his house had been skipped, which made Zheng Daqian pause. The mayor slowly hung up the phone and pulled a massive planning map from his drawer, pointing toward a specific section. As Fu Qing leaned in to look, his heart sank. The red demolition line on the map curved around his home like a sharp blade. The line clung tightly to the edge of his courtyard wall, leaving his small building looking like a forgotten island. It sat all alone, cast outside the red boundary. He stared at that line, his voice trembling as he asked what had happened. He wondered if there had been a mistake, but Zheng Daqian's tone was ice cold as he replied that there was no error. The mayor claimed the plan was set, and they were powerless. Yet Fu Qing couldn't help but ask why the whole town was being demolished, except for his house. Zheng Daqian's voice suddenly rose with unquestionable authority, repeating that he had already explained the situation. He insisted it was the expert's decision, and there was no way around it, before abruptly ending the meeting to attend another one. The mayor walked out, and as Fu Qing returned home, he ran into his neighbor Li Shen directing a moving company. Furniture was being loaded onto trucks, and seeing Fu Qing's soul-crushed expression, Li Shen couldn't hide a hint of gloating. He asked if Fu Qing had gotten his answers, but our protagonist remained silent, prompting the neighbor to curl his lip in disdain. Li Shen remarked that he knew this would happen, noting that Fu Qing's location was simply in a difficult spot for the developers. Since the house was right on the edge, it didn't obstruct anything. To them, paying compensation for it just wasn't worth the cost. Another neighbor leaned in to mock him, noting that soon he would be the only resident left in the entire town. He'd be stuck in that old house forever, surrounded by an airport where the noise would be absolutely deafening. Li Shen laughed even harder, adding that while they would all be living in new city apartments, the situation here would be quite different. He joked that Fu Qing would still be smelling airplane exhaust. Those harsh laughs stung like needles in his ears. But he didn't argue. He simply looked up in silence at the small building where he had grown up. Eventually, the moving trucks roared away, leaving him in the empty street to dial a number and call for Su Wan. He identified himself as Fu Qing, and from the other end, Su Wan's gentle voice replied with a hint of confusion. She wondered why he was calling so suddenly, and after a moment of silence, he explained he needed to consult her about a loan. Su Wan was a childhood friend who had studied finance and now worked as a relationship manager at a city bank. Su Wan sounded quite surprised as she asked why he needed a loan, but Fu Qing simply replied that everything was fine. He explained his plan to renovate the old family house, which only left Su Wan more confused by the sudden idea. She pointed out that the whole area was being demolished for the airport, so he briefly explained the strange situation. After hearing that his house was excluded, Su Wan fell silent before her voice flared with anger at the blatant unfairness. She couldn't believe the planning map would conveniently skip just one house, but Fu Qing remained remarkably calm about it. Whether it was a coincidence or not didn't matter anymore. Su Wan then asked what he actually intended to do. As he looked out at the empty land, he told her he wasn't just going to sit and watch that old house. He intended to tear it down and rebuild it entirely, leaving Su Wan silent for a long moment before asking if he was sure. This would be a massive investment, but he firmly stated he had made up his mind and needed a 300,000 yuan loan. Combined with his savings, he would have 500,000. Hearing that number, Su Wan could hardly believe her ears. She gasped, asking if he had lost his mind, as that seemed like far too much money just to rebuild a private home. But he wasn't building an ordinary house. He looked toward the horizon where the massive airport would soon be bustling with people. His home would be the closest and only private building near the airport, a fact that changed the entire equation. He asked her what she thought about the prospects of opening a hotel right next to the future international hub. Su Wan was stunned into silence. Being a sharp professional, she immediately grasped the scale of his ambition. She worried he was taking too big a leap, questioning if he had the management experience or the connections for such a risk. Faced with her genuine concern, he decided to ask her a question of his own to test the logic. Soo-won remained worried, noting that his old house might not be enough collateral for such a significant sum of money. He interrupted before she could finish, admitting that his lack of income proof was exactly why he had called her. He knew he was putting her in a difficult position, but to be honest, he had no other path left to take. He told her this was his only chance to change his fate, prompting Soo-won to sigh and remark that Fu-ching hadn't changed at all. She joked that he was always quiet until he said something shocking, then told him to bring his property deed and documents to her office tomorrow. She promised to help him find a way forward, though she couldn't guarantee success, and Fu-ching thanked her with genuine gratitude. To lighten the mood, she made a small joke, telling him not to thank her just yet, at least not until his hotel was open. She asked for a lifetime free stay in a presidential suite, and he seriously agreed. So, at dawn the next day, our journey truly began. Carrying all his hopes, he squeezed onto the first bus to the city, where Soo-won immediately began reviewing his paperwork with focused intensity. She made countless calls and took him to various departments, where bank auditors looked at his property deed, the one excluded from the demolition zone. They all wore expressions of pure disbelief, seeing a lone house surrounded by an airport as a risk that was, frankly, absurdly high. Time and again, he had to explain his business plan, but they looked at this quiet, somewhat reserved young man with nothing but doubt. There were moments during that period when he felt he couldn't go on, but fortunately, Soo-won was always there to encourage him. She didn't just refine his business plan, she taught him how to communicate with bankers and even utilized her own professional network. She even invited branch leaders to dinner, and a week later, just as he was beginning to lose hope, Soo-won called him. Her voice on the other end sounded exhausted, but we can hear the underlying excitement as she called out his name. She told him they had won the fight, and Fu-ching, unable to hide his agitation, asked if it was really true. It was true. 300,000 yuan would be disbursed within a week, a result that seemed almost like a miracle. She explained that she had practically signed a military pledge with her governor to push his specific project through the system. She had framed it as a key, innovative pilot project for the year, which was the only way she managed to convince her superiors. He held the phone in silence for a long time as tears welled up without warning, and he could only manage to whisper her name. He thanked her again, but Soo-won simply laughed and called him a fool, asking why he was being so formal with her. He immediately promised to take her out to dinner once the money arrived, but Soo-won just smiled and said that wouldn't be necessary. She told him to hurry up and build that hotel because she was waiting for her suite, and after hanging up, he walked to the window. Watching the construction begin outside, he knew this wasn't just his net worth, it was his entire life's gamble. He whispered to himself that there was no turning back now. He had to win, there was no other option. The day after the funds arrived, he immediately reached out to the best architectural firm in the city and hired the town's most famous construction crew, led by a man named Captain Zhao. Zhao was an honest man who, upon seeing the old family house, couldn't help but scratch his head and ask if Fu-ching really meant to demolish it. Fu-ching confirmed it, prompting Captain Zhao to ask what he planned to build, noting that the entire surrounding area would soon be an airport. He calmly pulled out a set of blueprints and told Uncle Zhao not to worry, as he had already commissioned a professional design. Captain Zhao took the blueprints, and after just one glance, his eyes widened in pure shock. "Good heavens," he muttered. He noted it was 4 stories with a basement and a viewing terrace, practically a luxury villa. Fu-ching simply replied that it wasn't a villa. It was a hotel. Captain Zhao and the workers behind him stood there in complete silence, utterly stunned by the word hotel. They were dazed, their expressions mirroring exactly what the bank auditors had looked like before. Captain Zhao couldn't help but feel a lingering doubt. He looked at Fu-ching's determined eyes and fell silent, staring at the blueprints for a long time before looking back at the house's location. Slowly, his gaze shifted. He slapped his thigh as a realization dawned on him, exclaiming that he finally understood Fu-ching's vision. He praised the young man's cleverness, struggling to find the right words, repeating "this is called" over and over as he searched for the term. He kept stammering, trying to describe the brilliance of the plan, his excitement growing even as the words failed him momentarily. It was a moment of pure, stuttering realization as the scale of the ambition finally started to sink in for the veteran builder. He continued to fumble for the right vocabulary, clearly impressed by the audacity of building a hotel right in the middle of an airport's path. The workers watched their captain, who was still caught in a loop of disbelief and sudden, frantic admiration for the boy's strategy. He kept repeating the phrase, his mind racing to categorize this unprecedented project that defied all local logic. Finally, he settled on trying to describe the unique constraints and the sheer genius of the location's potential. Captain Zhao struggled to find the right words, stammering that this plan was simply, well, it was something else entirely. He kept repeating this is called, as he searched his mind for the right technical term for such a bold move. Fu-ching simply watched him, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction that, as of today, the first part of the plan was finally in motion. He told the crew to use the materials they had and to start immediately, and soon, the heavy machinery roared to life. As the work began, several neighbors who hadn't moved out yet gathered around, eager to see what all the commotion was about. We see the old house, filled with childhood memories, collapse under the weight of the bulldozer, drawing gasps from the watching crowd. The neighbors whispered that Fu-ching must be truly mad, tearing down a perfectly good house without a second thought. A man named Li Shun stood by with his arms crossed, sneering that he'd heard Fu-ching brought a fortune to build a Western-style villa. He mocked the idea, suggesting she had more money than sense, and wondering what would happen once the building was actually finished. Others chimed in, asking if she wouldn't be terrified living in such a massive, lonely house all by herself at night. They joked that with no neighbors around, it would be like living in a graveyard, a classic case of vanity leading to suffering. They wondered if defying the urban planning office would end poorly, but Fu-ching remained completely unfazed by their idle gossip. Standing before the ruins, he watched the workers intently until the commotion eventually drew the attention of the town mayor, Zhang Daqian. The mayor watched from his car, likely surprised that instead of coming to him in tears, Fu Qing was making such a bold scene. Zhang Daqian rolled down his window and called out to him, and Fu Qing walked over calmly to ask if there was a problem. The mayor's tone was accusatory as he demanded to know what he was doing, to which Fu Qing replied he was simply renovating. Zhang Daqian pressed further, asking why a renovation required a total demolition and if he even had the proper permits for a reconstruction. To the mayor's visible frustration, Fu Qing produced the paperwork, and after seeing how complete it was, Zhang threw the files back. His voice turned threatening as he warned that the airport construction was a serious matter and not something to be trifled with. He told Fu Qing that any interference or illegal building would be met with harsh consequences, while Fu Qing calmly tucked his documents away. Fu Qing looked the mayor straight in the eye, assuring him that every single one of his actions fell strictly within the law. He stated he wouldn't interfere with anyone and expected the same in return, a level of toughness Zhang Daqian had likely never encountered. Ultimately, the mayor let out a heavy grunt and rolled up his window to drive away, though Fu Qing knew this visit was a warning. It was a test of his resolve, and in the following days, he practically lived at the construction site as the building's frame began to rise. On that empty land, the structure grew visibly every day. By the end of the first month, the foundation and basement were complete. By the second month, the main structure was topped off, and finally, the last truck of concrete was poured onto the fourth-floor roof. Captain Zhao celebrated by setting off firecrackers, while Fu Qing stood on the raw rooftop, looking down at the land beneath his feet. From there, the silhouette of the distant airport was becoming clearer. His hotel and the future terminal were now in a silent race. It was a contest to see which would be revealed to the world first, but while he was discussing wall materials with the designer, a fleet of law enforcement vehicles suddenly roared onto the scene, and a dozen officials stepped out of their cars. They wore uniforms from various departments, led by a middle-aged man, with Zhang Daqian following closely behind with a faint, cold smirk. The lead official demanded to know who was in charge here, his voice sharp and full of practiced authority. Fu Qing stepped forward to identify himself, only to have the man flash an ID and announce they were a joint enforcement task force. They claimed to have received reports of serious construction violations, safety hazards, and environmental pollution, and Fu Qing knew the real trouble had arrived. Zhang Daqian remained silent, but the gloating look in his eyes told the whole story. To be honest, he wasn't even trying to hide it. Facing the group, Fu Qing calmly replied that all their permits were legal and the work followed every national standard. The official snapped back that legality wasn't for Fu Qing to decide and immediately ordered his team to begin the inspection. He told them to check every single detail, leaving no stone unturned in their search for a mistake. We see the officials swarm the site, some checking fire safety, others measuring noise levels or taking air samples for testing. Others poured over the construction logs. Captain Zhao and the workers were stunned, but Fu Qing held them back from interfering. He let them search, knowing deep down that this was simply Zhang Daqian's revenge. In moments like these, he knew he couldn't afford to lose his cool. For the rest of the afternoon, the construction site ground to a halt as the officials found endless ways to be difficult. They claimed the rebar spacing looked wrong and demanded measurements, then insisted the dust control measures were inadequate and deserved a fine. They even demanded the cafeteria's health permit, while Zhang Daqian frequently leaned in to whisper into the lead official's ear. The two of them kept casting malicious glances in his direction, but Fu Qing remained perfectly silent throughout the ordeal. Instead, he used his phone to discreetly record every single movement and every face on the scene, continuing until the sun began to set. After turning the entire site upside down, the group finally gathered together for the middle-aged official to deliver his summary. He announced that after a detailed afternoon inspection, the site was found to be basically in compliance with the regulations. It was clear he hated saying those words, and Fu Qing finally felt a sense of relief. He had prepared for this. From the moment he decided to build the hotel, he had pushed every detail to the limit, even hiring the best supervision firm available. He had demanded quality certificates for every batch of materials and ensured every phase of construction followed the blueprints to the letter. His goal was to create a building that no one could find fault with, and seeing the result, Zhang Daqian's face turned incredibly sour. Evidently, the man hadn't expected a young man in his 20s to be so thorough and leave absolutely no room for error. However, the official suddenly shifted his tone, noting that because the site was adjacent to the airport project, the situation was special. To ensure total safety, they ordered a one-week work stoppage for a self-inspection, a move that finally made Captain Zhao shout in anger. The official immediately pulled a stern face, ready to assert his authority over the shouting foreman. But as Fu Qing looked at that greasy, arrogant face, he suddenly broke into a calm smile. To be honest, it was almost a laugh. He mentioned that he had just sent the video he recorded to a friend who worked for the provincial media. He asked them to imagine what would happen if the public saw exactly how this afternoon had played out. He was, after all, just a man trying to protect his home. He called himself a simple citizen with no power, forced to use such clumsy methods to defend himself, and at those words, the official's smile instantly froze. The official stared at him in utter shock, his eyes filled with disbelief. He likely never imagined this outcome in his wildest dreams. In his eyes, Fu Qing was just a weak, defenseless orphan, yet here he was, hiding such a powerful trump card. The middle-aged official sensed the atmosphere shifting and quickly walked over to ask, "Mayor Zhang, how should we handle this?" Zhang Daqian shot him a fierce glare and, through gritted teeth, finally ordered them to let the construction continue. Without looking back, he climbed into his car and led his so-called enforcement team away in a pathetic, hurried retreat. A sudden cheer erupted across the construction site as Captain Zhao and the workers gave Fu Qing a thumbs up in admiration. They called him impressive, but only Fu Qing knew that his bold words were only half true. He had recorded the video, certainly. However, the friend in the media was a total bluff. He was gambling that Zhang Daqian's guilty conscience would keep him from escalating things. He had won the gamble, but knowing the man wouldn't let this go, he looked toward the distant city lights and took out his phone. He called Suwon and told her he might be in big trouble, explaining everything that had happened that afternoon. There was a long silence on her end, leading him to ask if she was still there. Her voice sounded tired, yet remarkably steady. She told him not to panic, to which he replied that he wasn't panicking. He simply wanted to know what his next move should be. Suwon began to analyze the situation, noting that going head-to-head with the man on his own turf would only lead to a loss. He was certain they would suffer a loss and insisted on a change of plans. When asked for a new strategy, he simply quoted the art of war. All warfare is based on deception. Since his permits were in order and everything was legal, that served as his direct force, his solid foundation. Because Jung Daekian couldn't find a legitimate flaw, he was forced to use dirty tactics. Therefore, they needed a different approach. They needed to launch a surprise attack from a direction the man would never expect. And as Fu Qing listened, his chaotic thoughts began to clear. When he asked what this surprise attack was, Suwon answered slowly and clearly. The airport. The Anning International Airport project itself. Fu Qing was stunned for a moment, but she continued, asking him what the core competitiveness of his future hotel truly was. It was its unique location and its zero-distance proximity to the airport. From now on, he couldn't just limit his vision. She explained that he couldn't just focus on this tiny plot of land in Anning Town, nor could he keep obsessing over a clown like Jung Daekian. He needed to raise his perspective to match the scale of the airport project itself, finding a way to make the developers see him as one of their own. Suwon's words were like a bolt of lightning, instantly clearing the fog in his mind as he realized why Jung Daekian felt so comfortable bullying him. It was because, in the official's eyes, he was just a lone individual. However, if he could somehow bind himself to a giant entity like the airport, then Jung Daekian would have to think twice before acting. But the real question, of course, was how to create such a bond. Fu Qing admitted his hesitation, noting that the airport was a major provincial project and the people in charge were far above his station. He felt he had no way to even reach them, but Suwon simply laughed and asked who said anything about contacting the top leadership directly. She asked him if he had forgotten his own greatest advantage, leaving Fu Qing to wonder what that could possibly be. Suwon quickly explained that, aside from the airport itself, his construction site was the only place in Anning Town where a large crowd gathered. We see her point. The airport site had thousands of workers, and all of them needed a place to eat and basic necessities. Their lives were likely dull and inconvenient, and here he was, positioned right next door to them. A perfectly timed opportunity, one might say. He understood her meaning instantly and asked if she wanted him to start a business catering to them, hearing a hint of excitement in her voice. She told him it was more than just business. It was his best chance to integrate himself into the entire airport project ecosystem. He could use his current site to open a small, temporary service area, a canteen, a convenience store, or even an open-air cinema. The investment would be small, but it would solve the immediate needs of the workers by providing convenience and care rather than just goods. Fu Qing was genuinely impressed, calling her a genius, though Suwon just laughed it off in her usual steady manner. She claimed she wasn't the genius, but rather that he had inspired her by choosing to build his hotel right next to the airport in the first place. She reminded him that by solving the workers' daily struggles, he wasn't just selling products, he was building a reputation among thousands of men. When those thousands of workers began to rely on his kindness, she asked how he thought the airport's construction leaders would view him then. They would see him as a visionary partner, an ally who could stabilize their rear guard and handle their logistical headaches without being asked. By that time, she noted, his hotel would no longer be just a lonely, isolated building standing in the middle of nowhere. Suwon continued her advice, reminding him that a person capable of building such a hotel couldn't possibly be a fool. She urged him to act quickly, positioning their pieces on the board before Jung Daekian had a chance to make his next move. When Fu Qing asked what his first step should be, she suggested he find Uncle Zhao, whose workers had the skills to build a temporary shelter. Setting up a large food stall would be easy for him, and for supplies, she promised to provide contact numbers for reliable city wholesalers. She emphasized that these were her trusted clients, but the price must be fair. They weren't seeking quick profit, but rather the people's hearts. After hanging up, he felt every cell in his body come alive, as the previous exhaustion and confusion completely vanished. In their place was an unprecedented sense of hope. That very night, he found Uncle Zhao and shared the new plan with him. Uncle Zhao slapped his thigh in excitement, praising the idea and admitting he had been feeling sorry for the brothers at the airport site. Those poor men were stuck eating cafeteria food every day until they were sick of it. A food stall was exactly what they needed. With some beer and skewers, they would be overjoyed. Uncle Zhao patted his chest, personally guaranteeing the project's success. True to his word, Uncle Zhao's efficiency was staggering. 3 days later, a structure made of steel pipes and color-coded sheets stood ready. A large, simple plaza had emerged, which Fu Qing decided to name the gas station, a place to refuel both the workers and his own spirit. Meanwhile, Jung Daekian's spies were watching from the shadows, utterly confused as to why he was building a shed instead of a hotel. The grand opening of the food stall arrived quickly, and we see Fu Qing holding a small, modest ceremony to mark the occasion. He posted a sign in bold red letters at the entrance. For the first 3 days, all food and drinks would be half price. He even had Uncle Zhao send workers to the airport gates to hand out flyers. As evening approached, the sky began to dim. When the end-of-shift bell rang at the airport site, hundreds of workers poured out of the gates like a rising tide. Most were covered in dust and looked exhausted, but they stopped in their tracks when they saw the bright lights nearby. The aroma of roasted meat and stir-fry drifted through the air, leaving them wondering what this lively new place could possibly be. It looked like a place to eat, something called the gas station, someone suggested as the crowd gathered. They decided to take a look, and our first customer was a very young man who called out for the boss. When he asked if everything was truly half price, Fu Qing answered with a smile that it certainly was. Fu Qing personally headed to the kitchen, working with impressive speed to bring out a steaming, generous portion of rice. The young man's eyes widened at the mountain of pork before him, and soon, a second and third customer arrived. Within an hour, the entire gas station was packed with people sitting in groups, ordering small dishes and crates of beer. The frustrations they had suppressed all day at the construction site were finally released, fueled by alcohol and good food. The night, once empty and silent, was suddenly ignited by a boisterous energy that felt truly alive. Uncle Zhao and his workers were there too, their faces flushed from drinking. The first step of the plan was a success. Over the following days, business at the gas station became increasingly explosive, turning the humble shed into a local sensation. It became the only sanctuary and paradise for the workers in their otherwise dull lives at the airport site. However, the atmosphere shifted when a few strangers entered, causing the dining workers to frown as they sensed trouble. Fu Qing emerged from the kitchen, untying his apron and calmly asking the aggressive-looking men what they wanted to eat. The leader confirmed Fu Qing was the boss and bluntly stated they weren't there to eat, but to collect protection money. He held up 5 fingers, claiming that to do business in Anning Town, one had to follow their rules and pay up monthly. Before Fu Qing could even respond, a burly man at a nearby table suddenly stood up with a heavy thud. This was a contractor from the airport site named Zhang, a man who had become a regular at the stall. Contractor Zhang asked in a low, menacing voice what they thought they were doing there. The other workers looked on with furrowed brows, clearly seeing that these thugs had come specifically to cause trouble. Fu Qing remained composed in front of the counter, watching to see exactly where these uninvited guests intended to take things. The leader, a man named Zheng Qi, looked around with a sneer, clearly unimpressed by the humble surroundings. He and his lackeys sat down as if they owned the place, while one of them, a man named Randy, began to eye the crowd. Zheng Qi made it clear that if things were to continue here, they would have to do things his way. He looked at Fu Qing with a cold, demanding gaze that expected immediate submission. It was obvious they were looking for trouble, or perhaps just an easy payday from a new business. As the tension rose, a young worker tried to speak up, only to be told harshly to stay out of it. The thugs threatened to settle the score with everyone at once, but contractor Zhang simply laughed and picked up an empty beer bottle. With a casual squeeze, the glass bottle shattered into countless pieces right in his hand, a display of raw, effortless strength. We see the smiles on Zheng Qi and his men instantly freeze as workers began to rise from every corner of the room. Dozens of burly men stood up, some gripping glass bottles and others reaching for heavy wrenches or wooden planks. Without saying a single word, they silently surrounded Zheng Qi's group, forming a wall of muscle and grit. These men had spent their lives working hard labor on construction sites, and while they were simple people, they lived by a strict code of loyalty. Because Fu Qing provided them with good, affordable food, they were more than willing to stand up for him when it mattered. Zheng Qi and his small-time thugs were used to bullying honest townsfolk, but they had never faced a crowd like this before. Trembling with a mix of fear and false bravado, Zheng Qi shouted, asking what they thought they were doing and mentioning his uncle, Zheng Daqian. Contractor Zhang spat on the ground with utter disdain, asking if Zheng Daqian was really supposed to be someone important. He mockingly asked if the boy's father was the Jade Emperor himself before telling them to get out before things got violent. Zheng Qi wanted to throw out one last threat, but seeing the circle of workers tightening around him, his courage completely vanished. He and his lackeys scrambled away as fast as they could, followed by a sudden burst of mocking laughter from the crowd. Fu Qing watched their pathetic retreat, then looked at the workers who had protected him, feeling a genuine wave of warmth in his heart. And so, we see Fu Qing walk over and give a deep, respectful bow to Contractor Zhang and the other workers, thanking them for their help. Contractor Zhang simply waved his hand with a hearty laugh, telling him there was no need for thanks since they just couldn't stand those lowlifes. He declared that they would protect this place, and if anyone dared to cause trouble for Boss Fu again, they would be picking a fight with all several thousand of their brothers, a statement that was met with a roar of agreement from everyone around. Standing there in the center of the crowd, Fu Qing looked at those honest, sincere faces and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Meanwhile, watching from a distance, Zheng Daqian saw his nephew being chased away like a stray dog and began to tremble with pure rage. It was at this moment he realized things were spiraling out of his control and that the orphan he had always looked down upon had grown wings far stronger than he ever imagined. Not far away, the main structure of Fu Qing's 4-story building was finally complete. As it waited for its exterior decorations, he already had a name chosen for it, the Cloud Hotel. Deep down, he was determined to make everyone who had ever belittled him look up from the ground in awe of his success. After Zheng Qi and his men fled in disgrace, the atmosphere at the gas station reached an unprecedented peak of excitement. Contractor Zhang slapped a stack of money onto the table, telling Fu Qing that if he respected them at all, he would take his money back. He made it clear they hadn't helped him just to get a cheap meal or take advantage of his kindness. In that moment, Fu Qing realized he had gained something far more valuable than money. He had truly won the hearts of these men. Word of the incident quickly reached the ears of the Airport Project Command Center, and at first, the officials were quite nervous. To them, thousands of workers gathering at an uncontrolled private location seemed like a massive security risk. The project department reportedly held an emergency meeting overnight, where someone suggested shutting down Fu Qing's gas station immediately. They wanted to force all the workers back to the closed construction site, but the head of the construction team fiercely opposed the idea. He argued that locking them up would only cause tension and pressure to build until a major disaster eventually occurred. After a long and heated debate, a compromise was finally proposed. Rather than treating the place as a threat, instead, they decided to turn him into a controlled partner. Soon, an off-road vehicle bearing the plates of the Anning Airport Construction Command Center pulled up right in front of the construction site. A man in his 30s stepped out and walked straight toward Fu Qing with a polite smile. He asked if he was speaking to Boss Fu Qing. Fu Qing, feeling a bit wary, confirmed his identity, and the man reached out to introduce himself. He introduced himself as Qin Shou, the deputy director of logistics for the airport project, and asked if they could speak for a moment. After a brief hesitation, we see them sit down together at an empty table by the gas station. Fu Qing poured him a cup of herbal tea and waited. He asked Director Qin what business he had with him. Qin Shou simply smiled, his expression warm, and told boss Fu not to be so nervous. He explained that he hadn't come to cause any trouble. Rather, he was there because he wanted to discuss a business deal. Fu Qing was stunned by the word cooperation and asked for clarification. Qin Shou adjusted his glasses and got straight to the point. He explained that after careful study, the department agreed that the gas station had contributed significantly to the steady progress of the airport project. They were truly grateful to him for providing such an excellent leisure area for the workers, a rare kindness in such a high-pressure environment. They wanted to sign a formal cooperation agreement where the command center would officially authorize his gas station to become the #1 life services area for the Anning International Airport project. They offered to provide official signage and a monthly subsidy, with only one specific requirement in return. Fu Qing felt his heart begin to race as he asked what that requirement was. Qin Shou looked at him, his eyes filled with sincerity, and told him they simply needed him to guarantee food safety and price stability. They wanted the workers to eat happily and without worry. He noted that they knew Fu Qing's current prices left him with almost no profit. The subsidy was meant to ensure he could sustain this long term. By stabilizing the rear, the workers could focus on construction at the front lines. As he looked at the word cooperation on the agreement, Fu Qing felt his eyes grow warm. Su Wan's clever strategy, that brilliant, unconventional move, had ultimately succeeded in a way he had never even dared to imagine. He hadn't just become an ally to the project, he was now an officially certified partner. Without a second thought, he gave his answer. He agreed immediately, picking up the pen to sign his name as Qin Shou happily tucked the agreement away. Qin Shou told him it was a pleasure doing business, adding that if he ever needed help or faced harassment, he should call. After seeing Qin Shou off, he immediately called Su Wan, his voice trembling with excitement as he told her they had succeeded. Su Wan laughed softly on the other end, telling him she had known all along and urging him to remember this lesson. She explained that when one provides value others cannot refuse, they become a partner everyone wants to recruit. He was no longer an ant to be stepped on. His battlefield had officially upgraded. And sure enough, the very next day, a brand new blue sign was hung in the most prominent spot at the gas station, bearing 2 lines of bold characters. It read, "Designated Life Services Area for the Anning International Airport Project, authorized by the Logistics Department." The sign acted like a general's command flag. The moment it went up, the entire atmosphere of the station shifted. We see the workers standing a bit taller as they look at it. Dining here was no longer just a meal, but an official perk. With this, his identity transformed from a controversial small business owner into a legitimate, state-backed entrepreneur. He could clearly sense that the watchful, predatory eyes of Zheng Daqian had pulled back significantly after seeing that sign. For at least the following week, not a single incident of harassment occurred, a rare moment of peace, to be honest. Both the construction site and the station enjoyed this brief respite, though he knew it was merely the calm before the storm. A man like Zheng Daqian would never simply give up, and predictably, trouble arrived a week later in an unexpected way. That morning, Old Li, the truck driver who usually delivered the pork, approached him with a face full of misery. He apologized to boss Fu Qing, explaining with a heavy heart that today's meat delivery wouldn't be arriving. Fu Qing felt his heart sink and hurriedly asked what had happened. Old Li lit a cigarette, took a deep drag, and sighed. He explained that while hauling goods at dawn, he was intercepted by town transport officials claiming he had a violation. Despite being under the weight limit, they demanded a 10,000 yuan fine or threatened to impound his truck for a month. Hearing this, Fu Qing felt his heart sink instantly. He knew this was no coincidence, but a new tactic from Zheng Daqian. Since he didn't dare move against Fu Qing directly, he targeted the supply chain instead. Old Li added helplessly that he wasn't the only one. That morning, several trucks delivering vegetables, oil, and grain were intercepted at different intersections for various absurd reasons. From improper positioning to random fines and impoundments, the local drivers were now terrified to make deliveries to the station. Not a single one dared to come anymore. It was a classic move to cut off his resources, and a very effective one, to be honest. The gas station consumed massive amounts of food daily. If the supply chain broke, they would have to close within 2 days. By noon, the impact of the shortages became painfully clear. Several workers tried to order specific dishes, but they simply couldn't be made. Although the workers were understanding, Fu Qing could see the disappointment in their eyes, and deep down, he was growing increasingly anxious. He immediately called Qin Shou to explain the situation, and on the other end of the line, Qin Shou was absolutely furious. He called it outrageous, claiming this nonsense was actively sabotaging the normal operations of the entire airport project. He promised to negotiate with the town officials immediately, but an hour later, he called back with a helpless sigh for Fu Qing. He had spoken to them, and while they promised to fix it, the subordinates were just putting on a show while continuing the checkpoints. It was local protectionism at its worst, and as the headquarters, they had no direct administrative authority over the local town officials. They were playing games and stalling. Fu Qing realized he couldn't rely on others. He had to find a way to break through himself. He quickly dialed Su Wan, asking if she still had the contact information for the city's wholesale markets she had mentioned before. Su Wan responded immediately, confirming she had them, but asking with concern what had happened to cause such a sudden request. He briefly explained Zheng Daqian's latest scheme and the desperate situation the gas station was currently facing. After a few seconds of silence, Su Wan remarked that it was a ruthless move designed to drive him into a corner. She asked what he planned to do, noting that city deliveries were far away, costs would rise, and he didn't even have a vehicle. He told her he could rent or buy a used truck. The higher costs didn't matter, as Director Qin's subsidies could cover the difference. He firmly told her that he wanted full control over his supply chain, refusing to let anyone hold him by the throat ever again. Soo-won's voice held a note of genuine admiration as she told him not to worry about the vehicle. She had a client in the used car business. She promised to handle the paperwork and even cover the initial cost, while also calling the wholesale market to ensure he received the best goods. She reminded Fu Qing that Anning Town was just a small pond, and while Zheng Daqian was a big fish there, he was nothing outside of it. Her advice was simple. He needed to plant his roots in the vast rivers and seas beyond that tiny, restricted pond. These words were a revelation for him. He had been so focused on fighting within the town that he forgot he could simply bypass it entirely. 2 days later, we see a slightly worn blue truck pulling up right in front of the construction site entrance. Soo-won had driven it there herself, and as she handed him the keys, she asked if he had a driver's license. He confidently replied that he'd earned it in college, though he hadn't driven in a while, which, naturally, was a bit of a concern. Soo-won laughed it off, telling him the truck was durable, before opening the back to reveal it was packed to the brim. She explained that she had picked up the first batch of goods from the wholesale market on her way over for him to inspect. Looking at the fresh ingredients and the travel-worn Soo-won, Fu Qing felt a lump in his throat and struggled to find words. She quickly patted his shoulder, telling him to skip the sentimentality and start unloading since the workers were waiting to eat. She joked that he could pay her back by saving a few presidential suites for her once his hotel finally opened its doors. That evening, the meals at the gas station were more abundant than ever before, and word quickly spread among the men. When the workers learned that Fu Qing had personally driven dozens of kilometers to the city for these supplies, they were stunned. Foreman Zhang approached him with a bowl of wine, his face flushed with emotion as he admitted he rarely respected anyone this much. He declared that they were all with him now, and that this gas station had become a home they were willing to defend. Suddenly, hundreds of workers joined in, their voices rising in a unified shout that this was their home and no one would touch it. In that moment, we realized that Zheng Daqian's ruthless attempt to starve them out had completely and utterly failed. Instead of crushing him, Zheng Daqian had inadvertently forged an unbreakable bond between Fu Qing and these honest workers. With his own truck and an independent supply chain finally secured, the gas station's foundation was now rock solid. He poured all his energy back into the hotel's construction, and the designer Soo-won found was truly top tier. She designed a modern, minimalist style for the hotel that stood out sharply against the chaotic backdrop of the construction site. It looked like a piece of art dropped from a future city. Meanwhile, he opened a small supermarket on the premises. He began selling cigarettes, snacks, and daily necessities, even going so far as to install several washing machines. By providing laundry services, his gas station had effectively transformed into a fully functional, miniature community. It perfectly solved every lingering concern the airport workers had, and soon, word of his reputation began to spread. Through the workers' praise, everyone on the project learned of the young, capable boss named Fu Qing. One day, while he was balancing the books, Qin Shou suddenly walked in leading a small group of people. The leader was a middle-aged man in his 40s, flanked by 2 young assistants carrying notebooks and cameras. Qin Shou introduced them enthusiastically, identifying the man as the project development manager from Southern Airlines headquarters. This was manager Chun Mo, who was conducting a preliminary survey for future airline operations, a detail that made Fu Qing's heart race. He immediately stood up to shake hands, meeting Chun Mo's professional, business-like smile with his own. Chun Mo remarked that he had heard much about him, noting that Director Qin hadn't stopped praising him all the way there. Fu Qing modestly brushed off the compliment, and Chun Mo quickly got straight to the point of their visit. He explained that while touring the airport site, they had spotted his strikingly designed building from a distance. Director Qin had told them it was a hotel nearing its grand opening, and Chun Mo asked if he was indeed the owner. When Fu Qing confirmed this, Chun Mo asked for a tour, a request that was granted without a moment's hesitation. And so, setting aside his ledgers, he led them toward the hotel, while Chun Mo began asking a series of pointed questions. His answers were calm and clear as he led them into the hotel lobby, which, despite still being under renovation, left them all visibly stunned. Standing there, we see the distant construction site where rows of cranes were busy at work, making it easy to imagine the near future. From this vantage point, one would see silver planes taking off, a visual impact that was truly unparalleled. Manager Chun Mo couldn't help but offer a sincere compliment, telling Fu Qing that he was quite impressed by his vision. While everyone else was focused on immediate demolition payouts, he had seen the future value. Meanwhile, the assistants were busy. They kept taking photos and notes as we moved to the rooftop observation deck, where the entire scene opened up before us. The entire airport construction site was visible from there, and Chun Mo looked into the distance as he began to speak about his airline's crew. He explained that after every flight mission, their crew members needed a place to rest, and their standards for partner hotels were exceptionally high. Safety, privacy, and convenience were all non-negotiable, and this hotel possessed a unique, natural advantage in its geographic location. It was the closest building to the airport, even closer than their planned staff dormitories, and he turned to look at Fu Qing. With a certain spark in his eyes, he asked if Fu Qing would be interested, once the hotel opened, in a specific proposal. He wanted to know if the hotel could become the designated layover residence for Southern Airlines crew at Anning Airport. Hearing this, Fu Qing felt his heart skip a beat, knowing that a long-term cooperation agreement with an airline was a massive opportunity. It meant that even before opening, his hotel would have the most stable and high-quality clientele imaginable, a dream come true, really. Suppressing his inner excitement, he replied that he was certainly interested, and Chun Mo nodded with a satisfied smile. He promised that once construction was finished, a professional team would conduct an evaluation to finalize a strategic partnership. After that, he pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it over, suggesting they stay in touch before the group departed. Fu Qing stood alone on the rooftop for a while, feeling the wind and wondering if it was all a dream, until he prepared to head down. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught sight of a car parked on the distant road. It was Jung Daekian's vehicle. Jung Daekian was sitting inside with another person, appearing to point toward the hotel while saying something to his companion. And so, we see Fu Qing calmly walking downstairs as he sends a message to Su Wan, asking her to look into someone for him. Using his phone, he zoomed in from the rooftop to snap a blurry photo of the two men in the distance, adding a follow-up note. He specified that he wanted every detail possible on the man in the suit sitting next to Jung Daekian. Su Wan replied almost instantly. She acknowledged the request, sensing trouble, and he replied that this might be the real thing before walking to the construction gate. He approached Uncle Zhao, asking for a favor, and the older man immediately agreed, waiting to hear what Fu Qing needed. Fu Qing explained that he needed a sign made from the finest wood and hand-carved, prompting Uncle Zhao to ask what it should say. Taking out a pen and paper, he carefully wrote down the specific words he wanted displayed for everyone to see. The sign read, "Non-paying guests are strictly prohibited from entering." Uncle Zhao stared at the words for a moment, surprised. He soon chuckled, realizing Fu Qing was setting rules for certain people and promised to find the town's best carpenter for the job. He assured him it would be done perfectly, and 3 days later, the finished piece was ready for its debut. Carved from a solid piece of rosewood, the sign was placed in the most prominent position at the hotel's construction entrance. The appearance of this sign immediately caught everyone's attention, especially the workers who frequented the nearby gas station for meals. They would glance at it while passing by and smile to themselves, clearly understanding exactly who the message was intended for. Naturally, Jung Daekian saw it too, and he knew perfectly well that non-paying guests referred to him and his distinguished companion. It was Fu Qing's most direct way of telling them that their greedy eyes were not welcome on his property. A bold move, indeed. That evening, Su Wan called with the results, identifying the man as Li Huayu, a boss known for a very specific set of skills. He specialized in finding high-value projects with hidden weaknesses or disputes, then using various tactics to force a low-price takeover. After repackaging and reselling them for massive profits, he left a trail of ruined companies in his wake. Su Wan's report was chilling. Each word made Fu Qing's heart sink a little further, and he wondered aloud how such a man could be involved with Jung Daekian. Su Wan answered immediately, noting that an investment firm under Li Huayu's name had surfaced in official records just last month. We learned that Li Huayu had partnered with Jung Daekian's younger brother to form a new company called Anning Konggang Company, Ltd. Su Wan then asked him to guess where the company was registered, and the realization hit Fu Qing like a physical blow. He asked if it was his own property, and Su Wan's voice turned cold as she confirmed his worst fears. It was indeed his land. Everything finally made sense, as Jung Daekian never intended to let him live in peace. He had been excluded from the development zone specifically, so this land could be seized later, knowing its value would skyrocket. By having his brother collaborate with Li Huayu's firm, the plan was to eventually tuck this entire area into their own pockets. Fu Qing's hotel was standing directly in the way of their fortune, which is why they were using every possible tactic to drive him out. They wanted to turn his hotel into their hotel. Those previous petty tricks, it seems, were merely the appetizers. Now that the true corporate predators had entered the field, a worried Fu Qing asked Su Wan what their next move would be. Su Wan explained that Li Huayu's methods usually involve 3 steps, starting with a smear campaign to ruin his reputation. They would make him look like a liability to shake the confidence of his partners, followed by the second step, relentless legal litigation. They would use baseless lawsuits to drain his energy and capital before the final blow, cutting off his financial lifelines entirely. Fu Qing fell silent for a long time as he processed her analysis, before finally stating that if they wanted to play, he was ready. He was determined to see this through to the end, though Su Wan couldn't help but feel a flicker of concern for him. He asked her to keep a close eye on every transaction and movement between the firm and the new company to anticipate their next step. Meanwhile, he planned to finalize the partnership with Nanxing quickly, as he needed a powerful official ally to serve as a shield. Furthermore, the hotel had to be completed at top speed. Once the cash flow started, he could afford to wait them out. Hearing his resolve, Su Wan let out a long sigh of relief, remarking that he had truly grown up. He looked out the window at the sign prohibiting entry, telling himself that in a world that doesn't believe in tears, he was forced to change. To survive, he realized he had to become a warrior even more formidable than the enemies standing at his gate. The attack from the machinery factory came much faster and more fiercely than we expected, as overnight, several local forums in Anning Town, as well as some city media accounts, were flooded with harshly worded articles featuring sensationalist headlines designed to spark outrage. They asked where a lone young man got $500,000 for an illegal construction project right next to the airport. The articles claimed to reveal the capital behind the Cloud Hotel, sounding a safety alarm about a building less than 100 meters from the runway. They argued it would be a massive hazard for future flights, painting Fu Qing as a greedy holdout with a mysterious, suspicious background. He was portrayed as a man who ignored public safety for money, while the text heavily implied that his loans were obtained through illicit means. The reports even went as far as to suggest he had improper dealings with both the bank and the airport authorities. Everyone involved was being dragged through the mud as these articles spread across the internet like a digital virus. The public began to whisper that there was no way a young man could have such power on his own. Surely, someone was backing him. They waited to see how he would handle the fallout, while Li Shun, naturally, took great pleasure in the chaos unfolding around him. He spent his time forwarding the articles to various WeChat groups, adding his own inflammatory comments to the fire. He claimed that disaster follows those who lack virtue, and soon, this negative public opinion reached the airport project headquarters. Qin Shou called Fu Qing immediately, his voice thick with anxiety as he asked if he had seen the articles circulating online. He warned that the leadership was under immense pressure, but Fu Qing responded with a voice that remained remarkably steady. He told Qin Shou that he would handle the situation, believing that the truth would eventually come to light, and then hung up. Before he could even catch his breath, Uncle Zhao found him, looking absolutely furious at the blatant bullying they were facing. When Fu Qing asked what was wrong, Uncle Zhao explained with great indignation what had just happened at the construction site. A company called Manhwa Construction had sent people to their site specifically to poach the experienced masters working under him. They offered double the wages plus full benefits, and Fu Qing's heart sank when he heard that some of the younger workers were already tempted. He sought out those young workers, but he didn't scold them. Instead, he looked at them calmly and told them he understood their position. He told them that if they wished to leave, he wouldn't stop them, and every cent of their wages would be paid in full. However, he warned that the doors of the Cloud Hotel would never open for them again. Before turning away from the group, the young men stood there looking at one another, but in the end, not a single one left. They weren't fools, after all. They could see who was truly building a future and who was just there to cause destruction, so Uncle Zhao's team held firm. But as we often see, new trouble followed immediately, and the very next day, he received a formal court summons. A company he had never even heard of was suing him, claiming his project was interfering with their business operations. They demanded $1 million in damages and the immediate cessation of his hotel construction, which was quite a bold move. The company's registered address was a wasteland a few kilometers away where not a soul lived. This was clearly a malicious lawsuit. The goal was simply to stall him and drain his remaining funds, forcing him to hire a lawyer to prepare a defense. With his capital already stretched thin, this new expense was a heavy blow, leaving him with only 3 or 4 hours of sleep. He spent his days managing the site, calming the workers, and meeting with lawyers until he felt he couldn't go on. A voice told him not to fear, explaining that these 3 underhanded tactics were the standard moves of someone like Ji Buchang. Many had fallen to such tricks before, but he was told he would be different and was urged to look outside the station. Wiping away his exhaustion, Fu Qing walked to the door in confusion, seeing a line of vehicles gathered at the gas station. There were cars everywhere, filling the space as far as the eye could see, one after another in a steady line. The sheer number of vehicles was staggering, creating a scene that seemed almost impossible given the circumstances. Row upon row of cars sat there, a silent testament to something changing in the air around the project. Fu Qing wiped his eyes once more and stepped out to the entrance, still trying to make sense of what he was seeing. In the open space outside the station, dozens of workers who had just finished their shifts were huddled together with their phones. They were systematically leaving comments under every single article that had tried to smear his reputation one by one. Their words were rough, even peppered with curses, but they knew who treated them well and were determined to stand up for him. Watching them, his tears began to well up once again, this time out of pure gratitude as a sudden realization struck him. Ji Buchang had the money, the team, and the dirty tactics, but there was one thing he would never possess: genuine trust. He wiped his nose and walked toward them, calling out to Brother Zhang and the others, who simply grinned back at him in greeting. They told him there was no need for thanks. They simply couldn't stand seeing good people bullied, urging Fu Qing not to be afraid. With thousands of brothers standing behind him, they promised that if anyone dared touch a hair on his head, they would level their headquarters. As he looked at their honest, determined faces, the lingering confusion and fear in his heart vanished completely. Standing tall once more, he dialed the number for manager Chun Mo at Nanqing, introducing himself as Fu Qing with renewed confidence. He acknowledged the rumors circulating online, stating clearly that he had no intention of making pointless excuses or long explanations. Instead, he extended a direct invitation for the manager and the evaluation team to conduct a field inspection of the hotel at any time. Furthermore, he proposed a gamble. If the evaluation passed, they would sign immediately, and he would offer a 20% discount for 3 years. If it failed, he would cover all their travel expenses personally. He was betting everything on his own reputation and credibility. The manager agreed to bring their most professional team, hoping not to be disappointed, to which Fu Qing firmly replied that it was a deal. After hanging up, he immediately found Uncle Zhao, telling him they had exactly 3 days to prepare for the arrival of the evaluators. He poured every cent of his remaining capital into this final sprint, focusing all resources on this one critical moment. The goal was to perfectly present the core of the hotel, the parts that truly demonstrated its value, to the visiting team. He decided to abandon the time-consuming fine decorations for now, telling everyone they weren't just renovating, they were in a fight. The workers' enthusiasm was completely ignited. Foreman Zhang and his crew even volunteered to keep working long after their shift had ended. A strange and wonderful synergy formed between the massive airport site and his hotel project as thousands of men joined the effort. By day, they sweated at the airport, and by night, they gathered at his site under temporary floodlights to continue the battle. The entire construction site remained brightly lit 24 hours a day, buzzing with an intensity that bordered on the fanatical. It was a sight that shocked everyone who saw it. 3 days later, when the Nanqing evaluation team arrived under Chun Mo's leadership, they were all utterly stunned by the scene before them. In just a few short days, everything had changed. The building had been completely transformed, with the core areas already reflecting the true essence of a 5-star hotel. Fu Qing led them up to the rooftop observation terrace, which was now furnished with comfortable outdoor seating. He extended an invitation, asking manager Chun to take a seat while he served everyone hot tea, introducing the space as they settled in. He explained that this would soon be the Cloud Hotel's executive lounge, serving as a premier viewing gallery for the airport. Every member of the Nanqing flight crew staying at the hotel would be able to enjoy top-tier views and a relaxing environment here. Chun Mo held his teacup, gazing at the massive terminal in the distance with a look of pure shock, as did his team. Meanwhile, the team members moved through every corner of the hotel with their instruments, conducting rigorous tests while Fu Qing waited anxiously. An hour later, the testing was complete. A technical lead wearing glasses walked over to Chun Mo's side. He handed over a freshly printed report, which Chun Mo began to read through with agonizing slowness, line by line. Fu Qing's palms were drenched in sweat. Finally, the manager put the report down and fixed him with a sharp, piercing gaze. He admitted that Fu Qing had performed a miracle. The quality and design exceeded their expectations, especially the soundproofing. The indoor noise was controlled at 40 decibels, a remarkable feat that finally allowed Fu Qing to breathe a sigh of relief. To achieve that silence, they had sacrificed time-consuming decorations, but in that moment, we see that the gamble had paid off. However, Chunmo's tone suddenly shifted, noting that the hotel was still a half-finished product with many missing facilities. This didn't strictly meet their agreement. Fu Qing took a deep breath, preparing his backup plan, but then Chunmo smiled. The manager confessed that he was personally very optimistic about the hotel's future and had decided to take a gamble of his own. With that, he pulled 2 documents from his briefcase, one of which was the formal letter of intent for their partnership. The other document, however, was a private angel investment agreement, as Chunmo calmly explained to him. We see that this letter of intent could be signed immediately, representing the official stance of Nanjing Airlines. It would help him withstand a great deal of outside pressure, and then Chunmo pushed the second document forward. As for this investment agreement, it was a personal contribution of 1 million in his wife's name for the hotel. It was meant to help him through this crisis and finish the hotel. No shares were required, only repayment once profitable. Fu Qing had never imagined, even in his wildest dreams, that the manager would support him in such a way. His voice trembled as he asked why, and Chunmo took a sip of tea, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. He admitted that in Fu Qing, he saw a shadow of his younger self, having nothing, yet daring to challenge the world. He didn't want to see such a dream strangled in its cradle by dirty capital, and Fu Qing felt a sudden warmth in his eyes. He stood and bowed deeply, thanking Manager Chun and swearing to himself that he would never betray this trust. That afternoon, on the rooftop of his half-finished hotel, our protagonist signed that $1 million agreement. At the very moment his pen touched the paper, he received a message from Su, one that changed everything. It seemed the chairman of Shibwa had begun a hostile takeover of their bank shares on the secondary market. The man was trying to force her out, and as Fu Qing looked at the horizon, he knew the final battle had begun. Manager Chunmo's private investment was like a shot of adrenaline into his nearly exhausted capital chain. But Suwon's text felt like a bucket of ice water poured over his head, chilling him to the bone. He knew that Suwon had become a target solely because of him, so he immediately dialed her number. The phone rang for a long time before she answered, her voice sounding exhausted as she mentioned she was in a meeting. He urged her to keep it brief and asked if she was alright, but Suwon interrupted him before he could finish. She spoke with a forced lightness, telling him it was just a normal business struggle and that he shouldn't worry. She insisted she could handle it, telling him that finishing the hotel was the best way to support her against people like Ji Buchang. If his project succeeded, it would prove her judgment right, leaving the old fossils on the bank's board with nothing to say. Fu Qing knew she was only trying to comfort him. In reality, Ji Buchang was using his massive capital to pressure the entire bank. His goal was to force them to sacrifice Suwon as the fall person for the loan, so Fu Qing spoke softly into the phone. He whispered an apology, and after a brief silence on the other end, Suwon reminded him that they were friends. She told him her help wasn't an investment, but an act of trust, and that everyone would only win if he succeeded. She hung up after promising to stay in touch, leaving the words friendship and trust echoing in his mind. Those words weighed on his heart like a mountain. He couldn't lose, not just for his hotel, but for Suwon's entire career. We returned to the construction site, where Uncle Zhao and the workers were anxiously waiting for any news of the result. They crowded around him, asking what the people from Nanjing had said, and Fu Qing carefully tucked his emotions away. He forced a smile and announced that the airline was satisfied and would be signing a letter of intent with them. A massive cheer erupted across the site, as the hard work of the past few days had finally yielded a reward. Seeing their simple, honest smiles, he declared on the spot that every worker's salary for this month would be doubled. Even the airport workers who came to help would receive a 1,000 yuan bonus, and the very next day, Chunmo transferred the investment. The legal department also sent the signed letter of intent. With Nanjing's official backing, the rumors of illegal construction vanished. To be honest, it was the perfect shield, so he immediately called Director Qin Shou to make his next move. He asked to hold a press conference in the name of the airport headquarters, which left Qin Shou momentarily stunned and confused. Fu Qing explained that it was time for the Cloud Hotel to make its official debut alongside their partnership with Nanjing Airlines. He intended to invite every major journalist from the city and the province to witness the truth for themselves. He would explain the hotel's origins and make the cooperation agreement and all legal documents public for the entire world to see. Qin Shou immediately understood the intention. He realized Fu Qing wanted to use the enemy's own momentum to completely flip the public narrative. Fu Qing answered slowly and deliberately, stating that he was tired of playing hide-and-seek with his detractors. He wanted to lay all his cards on the table. Since they wanted to make him famous, he decided to give them exactly what they asked for. He would become famous on his own terms, leaving Qin Shou silent on the other end of the line for a long moment. To be honest, this was a significant risk for the director as well, as any mistake at the press conference would fall on his shoulders. Finally, he made up his mind, telling Fu Qing that the airport project needed a partner with his kind of resolve. He agreed that Anning Town needed this vitality, promising to contact the media and provide the airport headquarters conference room. The date was set for 3 days later, with a shared promise to fight this battle for their reputation together. Those 3 days passed in a flash, and thanks to Qin Shou's extensive network, nearly every prominent media outlet in the city was invited. At 10 in the morning, the conference officially began, and we see Fu Qing take a deep breath before stepping up to the podium. He greeted the media and guests, introducing himself as the founder of the Cloud Hotel while acknowledging the recent online rumors. He noted that some called him mysterious, while others claimed the source of his funding was suspicious or even illegal. There were even claims that his building was an eyesore next to the airport, but he stood there today to prove none of it was true. He described himself as just an ordinary boy from Anning Town whose parents had passed away, leaving him only the old family house. When the town was demolished and his home was the only one left outside the red line, he didn't complain. He felt fate had kept him there for a reason. He explained how he used his inheritance and a 300,000 yuan bank loan to gather the initial capital to rebuild. His dream was to transform an abandoned house into a hotel serving the new airport, giving it the name Cloud. He hoped it would soar toward the clouds in a brighter future, just like the planes nearby, speaking with a calm and steady voice. He wasn't trying to be overly emotional. He was simply stating the facts of a young man protecting his home and chasing a dream. The room gradually fell silent as many journalists put down their pens, captivated by the sincerity of his story. As the room listened in silence, Fu Qing continued, stating that every cent of his funding was clean, including the loan from his friend at the bank. He noted that this friend was now suffering unjust accusations for simply being professional, as we see him look towards Su Wan in a quiet corner. Her eyes were slightly red as he declared that every single step of his construction had been perfectly legal and compliant with all regulations. Director Qin Shou of the airport headquarters, who had personally supervised the project's quality, nodded back at him with an encouraging gaze. Fu Qing insisted that his future was not that of a lonely holdout, as some had claimed, but something far more collaborative. He revealed that he had already reached a preliminary strategic partnership with manager Chen Mo of Southern Airlines. Turning toward the display board and the letter of intent on the wall, he explained that this place would soon become a vital hub. It was destined to be the warmest harbor for Southern Airlines flight crews, a revelation that caused an immediate stir throughout the room. An official partnership with a major airline was easily the biggest news of the day, making all previous doubts seem utterly pale and weak. He pointed toward Uncle Zhao and Zhang Gongtong in the front row, responding calmly that he possessed no mysterious or hidden background. He claimed only a heart that wanted to do something for his hometown, supported by the very land he loved so dearly. He credited the leaders who supported him, the partners who trusted him, and the workers who had bled and sweated alongside him. The conference then moved to the Q&A session, where a male reporter stood up to ask a sharp, pointed question to Fu Qing. The reporter noted the mention of the bank friend suppression, pointing out that a firm called Huayu Capital was currently attempting a hostile takeover. He added that the media outlets smearing Fu Qing's name were also linked to Huayu Capital, asking if this was a targeted, malicious business attack. With every eye in the room fixed on him, Fu Qing remained silent for a moment before clearly stating that there are two types of people. One type sees value and finds ways to create and protect it, while the other only thinks of how to plunder and destroy it. He declared that the Cloud Hotel welcomes all creators, but will always keep its doors closed to greedy predators, a bold stance, to be sure. He expressed his firm belief that under the light of day, all conspiracies and schemes would eventually have nowhere to hide. As he finished, the room erupted into thunderous applause, and by that afternoon, the news regarding the Cloud Hotel began to spread rapidly. The news swept across every front page in the city, and we see Fu Qing's image shift from a controversial holdout to something new. He was now being hailed as a legendary entrepreneurial pioneer, a man who dared to take on massive projects single-handedly. He became the face of a youth who refused to bow to capital, but the very next day, trouble arrived as expected. Early that morning, Uncle Zhao ran over in a panic, shouting that the hotel's water had been cut off, causing Fu Qing's heart to sink. He asked what was happening, since they had paid the water bills on time, and Uncle Zhao confirmed that they certainly had. However, the town's water plant claimed that the main pipes in this specific area required a full week of maintenance. It was a classic, underhanded tactic used to harass local businesses, and without water, everything was at a standstill. The final renovation work had to stop, and even worse, the gas station could no longer operate normally either. Fu Qing immediately thought of Qin Shou, but before he could even call him, an unexpected visitor arrived at his door. The man introduced himself as Wang Weiguo, the former chairman of the once mighty Hongta Group. The name Hongta Group sounded familiar to us. It was once a very famous local real estate company in the city. But a few years ago, it reportedly went bankrupt overnight due to a broken capital chain, and now Weiguo looked on with a complex gaze. He told Fu Qing that he had come specifically to share a certain piece of information with him. The boss of Huayu Capital who was currently pushing Fu Qing into a corner was a man named Ji Buchang. This was the same man who used those very same tactics to ruin Weiguo, making Fu Qing realize this man was a natural ally. Curious, Fu Qing asked Chairman Wang to explain exactly what had happened back then. Weiguo fell into a painful memory of when he was developing a large commercial complex, much like Fu Qing is doing now. He had invested his entire fortune into it, but just as the project was nearing completion, Ji Buchang suddenly appeared. He presented himself as a savior, yet he used the situation to swoop in and offer less than 30% of the actual value. In the end, he acquired all of Weiguo's shares and the nearly finished project for a fraction of what they were worth. He explained how he went from being a billionaire to a man with nothing but debt. Wang Weiguo's story was a cautionary tale of a fall from grace that felt all too familiar. We see that what Fu Qing is experiencing now is almost identical, though Weiguo's end was far more tragic. Weiguo pulled a thick stack of documents from his briefcase, explaining that he had spent years preparing for this. He had been collecting evidence of Ji Buchang's crimes, noting that the man was ruthless but far too overconfident. Many of his shady deals had left a trail, all conducted through a shell company registered overseas. Buchang thought he was being clever, but the very person who helped him set it all up was now an informant. Weiguo had planted that person by his side, and now he held evidence of massive tax evasion. There were records of illegal asset transfers and bribery, any one of which could ruin Buchang forever. As Fu Qing looked at the documents, his breathing quickened. This wasn't just paper, it was a weapon. It was a blade meant to strike Buchang down, and Fu Qing urgently asked why Weiguo hadn't used it yet. Weiguo shook his head bitterly, explaining that a bankrupt old man like him had no power against Buchang's connections. Every time he tried to submit the materials, they simply vanished, and then he looked up with a burning gaze. He told Fu Qing that things were different for him, because he had the airport project backing him up. With Southern Airlines involved, Fu Qing had the kind of public attention and influence that Bo-chang couldn't ignore. In Weiguo's hands, this evidence was just scrap metal, but in Fu Qing's hands, it was something else entirely. He believed it could be the sword that finally cuts off the dragon's head. To be honest, it was a heavy burden. Fu Qing realized Weiguo wasn't asking for help. He was entrusting his last hope for revenge to him. And right at that pivotal moment, Qin Shou called him, breaking the heavy silence of the room. Knowing the moment to strike back had arrived, Fu Qing looked up with firm resolve and accepted the challenge. Fu Qing promised himself that justice might be delayed, but it would certainly arrive for the investigation team. The news of the team entering Anning Town spread faster than a water outage notice, and Zheng Daqian was interrogated for 5 hours. When he finally emerged, his once arrogant authority had completely vanished, and half an hour later, the construction site's faucets began to flow with clear water once again. That night, Fu Qing locked himself in his office with Wang Weiguo's documents. He knew he had to find a way to pin Bo-chang down, so he couldn't struggle, so he called Su Wan. He told Su Wan he needed her help to contact an absolutely reliable provincial media outlet with significant influence. Su Wan immediately understood his intent and asked if he planned to blow the whole thing wide open. Deep down, he was weighing his options, wondering just how much he should let the enemy see at this stage. He considered the risks of revealing his hand too early, knowing that timing was everything in a fight like this. It was a delicate game of cat and mouse, and he needed to be sure of his next move before proceeding. He reiterated that he needed a provincial media outlet that was both trustworthy and powerful enough to make an impact. Su Wan asked again if he wanted to destroy him, as Fu Qing looked out at Zheng Daqian's darkened office building. In the silence of the night, he answered firmly that this wasn't just about destruction, it was about judgment. She suggested a producer from the provincial TV station's focus tracking program, an upright senior from her university days. This producer hated the dark side of the capital markets, and their show was the highest-rated investigative program in the province. Anyone targeted by them was usually finished. Fu Qing then sorted through the massive pile of documents to find the key evidence. He found clear records of illegal profits made through overseas shell companies, but he chose not to reveal all his cards yet. To deal with an old fox like Bo-chang, he had to peel away his disguises layer by layer, like an onion. He wanted Bo-chang to feel endless fear, so he sent the encrypted files to the focus tracking team. He didn't sign his name, only writing a single sentence at the end of the email. This is only the beginning. 2 days later, the provincial TV station's focus tracking program aired right on time, featuring a title that was nothing short of explosive. It was called Bo-chang's Secret Wealth Empire, and the program moved with the gripping rhythm of a suspense thriller, using detailed data and expert interviews. We see the evidence Fu Qing provided being peeled back layer by layer, presented clearly before millions of viewers across the entire province. The host asked in a cold, piercing tone why our capital markets had become a lawless ATM for certain individuals. He questioned why our regulatory systems seemed to turn a blind eye to such blatant illegal activities. Deep down, Fu Qing knew that the end for Bo-chang had finally begun. To be honest, it was a long time coming. That night, the official website of Huayu Capital was paralyzed by a flood of panicked investors, and the next day, their stock hit the limit down immediately. Massive sell orders poured in like a waterfall, sealing off any chance of escape, while Bo-chang's phone was practically ringing off the hook. There were interrogations, insults, and demands to withdraw capital or terminate contracts. The business empire he had painstakingly built for years was reeling. After just one weekend, signs of a total collapse began to appear, and the final straw that broke the camel's back came from Anning Town. On his third day of isolated investigation, Zheng Daqian finally buckled under the pressure and gave up Bo-chang. He confessed everything, including how he conspired with Bo-chang to seize Fu Qing's land and exactly how many bribes he had accepted. He detailed all the dirty work he had performed in the shadows, and the investigation team soon discovered the company he co-owned with Bo-chang's brother. The business was called Anning Empty Space Service Company Limited, and shortly after, Zheng Daqian was officially handed over to the judicial authorities. That evening, the gas station closed early and the workers returned to their dorms, but Fu Qing stayed in the office to check the accounts for new materials. Uncle Zhao, worried about leaving him alone, decided to stay behind as well. It was a quiet moment, or so it seemed. Looking out at the torrential rain, Uncle Zhao remarked with concern that the weather felt wrong, as if something bad was about to happen. Fu Qing also felt a strange, inexplicable irritability, and right then, the office door was kicked open as a terrified security guard rushed in. He shouted that a mob had arrived with weapons, smashing everything and everyone in sight, and that they couldn't be stopped. Uncle Zhao stood up instantly, grabbing a shovel from the corner with a curse. It seems the fight had come to their doorstep. He actually dared to come here and seek his own death. Fu Qing's heart sank, but he quickly regained his composure and told Uncle Zhao to call the police. The security guard replied with a tremble in his voice that it was too late. They had already smashed all the phones. It seemed they had a plan. They intended to destroy the entire construction site, and Fu Qing realized instantly that Bo-chang was playing for keeps this time. These weren't just street thugs, but professional rioters whose sole purpose was to cause the maximum amount of destruction possible. If the site was ruined or lives were lost, his hotel project would be finished forever, a fact Bo-chang knew all too well. Making a split-second decision, he told Uncle Zhao to hold the gate without fighting head-on, prompting the old man to ask what he would do. He told him he was going for help. Outside, the piercing sound of smashing and arrogant shouting echoed from the direction of the hotel building. Over a dozen dark figures armed with machetes and iron bars were frantically destroying the glass curtain walls he had just finished installing. Suddenly, a pair of blinding headlights flashed behind him as an unlicensed blackman sped directly toward him at full throttle. They wanted him dead. His mind went blank for a second, but in that spark of time, Foreman Zhang suddenly lunged from the side. The foreman shoved him out of the way, shouting for the boss to run, just before his own body was sent flying like a ragdoll by the impact. The van didn't slow down for even a second, continuing to accelerate into the darkness as if nothing had happened. With tears and rain blurring his vision, Fu Qing knew he couldn't leave. If he ran, Uncle Zhao Zhao would be defenseless and Zhang's sacrifice would be in vain. A surge of unprecedented fury and killing intent rose from the depths of his heart as he looked at the thugs still smashing his property. His gaze became as cold as Antarctic ice. Instead of heading for his own car, he made a different choice. He turned and sprinted toward the idle bulldozer sitting in the corner of the site. A machine foreman Zhang had taught him how to operate. He started the engine, and the steel beast roared to life in the rainy night, emitting a deafening growl that shook the ground. The rioters were startled by the sudden, thunderous noise as we see Fu Qing steering the massive bulldozer toward them. He advanced slowly but with an irresistible, crushing pressure, prompting one thug to scream in terror that he was a madman. Yes, a madman indeed. Terrified out of their wits, the mob scattered in every direction, and for now, he didn't bother to chase them. Just then, we see a dozen police cars with flashing red and blue lights tearing through the rainy night, sirens wailing. Qin Shou and Su Wan rushed out of the lead car, only to find Foreman Zhang lying in a pool of blood amidst the wreckage. They also spotted Fu Qing sitting in the bulldozer's cab, and Su Wan ran toward him, her voice trembling as she called his name. She begged him to come down and make sure he was alright, and he jumped from the high cab, falling heavily into her arms. He whispered to her that he hadn't killed anyone, and Su Wan held him tightly, her voice choking up as she told him she knew. She kept repeating that it was over and that everything would be alright now, trying to soothe the storm inside him. But deep down, he knew it wasn't over. From this night on, it was a fight to the death between him and Ji Buchang. Foreman Zhang was rushed to the city's best hospital, where doctors found severe blood loss and a broken leg, though he was stable. As he waited in the hospital corridor, the image of the foreman being sent flying by the van played on a loop in his mind. While Su Wan draped her coat over his shoulders, Qin Shou was on the phone constantly, as Chun Boying had also been informed. Boying used his connections to pressure the authorities, demanding a full investigation into Ji Buchang's reckless and violent assault. Buchang's move had cost Fu Qing dearly, but it also shattered all unspoken rules, turning the villain into an enemy of the state. The police launched an overnight manhunt, quickly capturing the dozen thugs at various checkpoints as they tried to flee the city. The unlicensed van that struck Foreman Zhang was eventually found abandoned in a quarry, and the interrogations began immediately. Under immense pressure and faced with undeniable evidence, the thugs soon confessed that their employer was Buchang's most trusted assistant. This assistant was the man who handled all of Buchang's dirty work, but when the police arrived, he chose to take his own life. He likely thought this would protect his boss, but he underestimated Fu Qing and the explosive files Wang Weiguo had provided. Turning to his friends, Fu Qing asked Su Wan to contact the producer of the investigative show Focus Tracking immediately. He then asked Qin Shou to arrange a meeting with the Discipline Inspection Commission, preparing his final move for the next morning. He made 2 copies of the files. One went to the provincial TV station, and the other was delivered to the commission's top official. Immediately after, a massive anti-corruption storm began to sweep through the province's financial and political circles. The Focus Tracking production team spent an entire week creating a 1-hour special, setting a new historical record for the show. In just a few days, the opposition collapsed entirely, and once the dust settled, everyone who had helped him gathered together. He looked out at the Anning International Airport, now officially open and bustling with activity, without making any grand or boastful speeches. Instead, he simply gave a deep bow of gratitude, thanking them all because the clouds belonged to everyone now. We returned to the hotel's rooftop terrace, which had now become the most expensive and beautiful vantage point in all of Anning Town. Su Wan walked over and handed him a glass of champagne, teasingly saying that he finally looked like a successful man, her dear Fu Qing. She told him that he hadn't just built a hotel, he had fundamentally changed this place and the lives of many people. He smiled as he watched the brilliant lights of his hotel and the arriving guests, knowing the abandoned orphan had finally found a home. Ji Buchang's successor was a middle-aged official named Zhao Fuming, who had been brought in from the city to take over. Representing young entrepreneurs, Fu Qing attended a seminar on Anning Town's future development that lasted the entire morning. During the meeting, Zhao Fuming was generous with his praise, noting that Fu Qing's Cloud Hotel had set an incredible precedent. He stated that Fu Qing had proven that with enough vision and courage, this land could produce world-class results. The official explained that all future planning for the region would now follow the high standards set by the Cloud Hotel. Their goal was to transform the area into a hotspot for investment, a place where talent would truly want to stay and build a life. As the meeting concluded, Zhao Fuming shook Fu Qing's hand sincerely, acknowledging that the town had treated him unfairly in the past. He promised that the town now needed Fu Qing's leadership and offered full support for any future needs he might have. Looking at the spark in the official's eyes, Fu Qing could see that a new era was beginning for them all. He knew that spring had truly arrived in Anning Town, as the hotel business flourished and other airlines began seeking partnerships. Word of mouth spread, and soon various business conferences and industry forums were choosing his hotel as their primary venue. Holding meetings at the Clouds became a new trend in the city's business circles, while the gas station he built was far from forgotten. He upgraded and renovated it into a semi-open American-style plaza, though it still maintained its affordable, community-friendly prices. With its rugged, welcoming atmosphere, it became the favorite late-night dining spot for airport ground staff and local residents alike. Fu Qing officially hired Uncle Wang as the hotel's director of engineering, putting him in charge of all facility maintenance and management. The old crew became the technical backbone of various departments, each of them now proudly wearing their brand new uniforms. They were now formal employees of a 5-star hotel. Even Wang Weiguo came to visit, bowing deeply the moment he saw Fu Qing. The man thanked him for the second chance, but Fu Qing quickly reached out to help him up, refusing to accept such a heavy gesture. He told Uncle Wang that he had only done what was right, and that it was actually the older man's support that provided the strength to finally cut through the darkness. Wang then revealed he planned to use his recovered funds to start a legal aid foundation. His goal was to help entrepreneurs who, like them, had been bullied by predatory capital. He patted Fu Qing's shoulder with a look of relief. He admitted he no longer had the strength to fight them, but noted that the future of this world belonged to Fu Qing's generation now. As Fu Qing saw him off, he watched the man's back, no longer hunched, but standing straight once more, disappear into the crowd. We see that an old era had finally come to an end, and with the hotel running smoothly, Fu Qing finally had a moment for himself. The first thing he did was transfer Zhang Gongtu from a general ward to the best VIP recovery center in the city hospital. He took it upon himself to cover every single expense. When he went to visit, Zhang was lying in bed, looking quite surprised. The man nearly jumped out of bed in excitement, asking Boss Fu why he had come all this way for such a minor injury. Fu Qing placed a bouquet of flowers by the bedside and told brother Zhang that this was certainly not a minor injury. He reminded him that he had risked his life, and while the doctors said his leg was healing well, it would still take a long time. He told him to rest easy without any worries, as his salary would continue and all medical bills were fully covered by the hotel. This tough northern man, who never complained about hardship, choked up like a child and said it was all worth it as Fu Qing patted his shoulder. He promised that from now on, it would be his turn to protect their home. After leaving the hospital, Fu Qing received a call from Su Wan. The Cloud Hotel loan project she managed had become famous at the head office. Far from being punished, she was being celebrated. Instead, she received an exceptional promotion, becoming the youngest branch president in the bank's history. She laughed over the phone and asked, "President Fu, are you free tonight? I'd like to treat you to dinner. Where would you like to go?" He suggested the presidential suite at his own Cloud Hotel. That evening, he had the kitchen prepare the most exquisite dinner available. The meal was delivered to the top-floor suite, a room he specifically reserved for Su Wan and never opened to the public. On the terrace, one could overlook the entire night view of the airport New City. When Su Wan saw him arrive, she smiled warmly at him. She remarked that the view here was still the best. He joked back that of course it was, considering whose territory they were standing on. They didn't talk about work or the heart-pounding events of the past. We see them acting simply like two old friends who hadn't met in years. They sipped tea and chatted about trivial things until she suddenly looked at him seriously. "Hey Qing, do you remember when you decided to build this?" She reminded him of her request for a lifetime free presidential suite once he opened. He listened and nodded, remembering the moment well. He told her he was now fulfilling that promise. Su Wan laughed self-deprecatingly, admitting she had actually been joking at the time. She confessed she thought he was crazy to start a hotel with 50,000 in a wasteland everyone else was fleeing. She hadn't believed in him. She had only helped because she didn't want to see him lose too badly, even preparing to cover some of his losses. He listened in silence. She told him he had turned an impossible dream into reality, proving to be far more capable than she had ever imagined. Then, she stood up and walked directly over to stand in front of him. She didn't offer a verbal answer, but instead slowly gave him a kiss. Afterward, she held him, her voice trembling with a slight rasp. "Hey Qing, I want you," she whispered. "It's you that I want." His tears fell without warning. He smiled and nodded vigorously, agreeing to her heart. That night, they talked long into the night about their visions for the future. Soon, the second anniversary of the Anning International Airport's opening arrived. It was also the second anniversary of the Cloud Hotel's opening, a celebration where business elites, government officials, and leaders gathered together. We see Fu Qing dressed in a custom black suit, with Su Wan on his arm, standing at the banquet hall entrance to welcome every guest. Su Wan had officially resigned from the bank to become the CEO of the Cloud Group, handling all the complex business affairs on his behalf. This allowed him to focus more on the group's strategic development. Qin Shou arrived as well, now serving as the director of the new city management committee. She had become the true leader of this new city. When she saw him, she smiled and called out to President Fu. She joked that he was now the biggest god of wealth in their new city. Chen Imo also made a special trip, flying in all the way from Guangzhou. Now the vice president of Southern Airlines. He gave Fu Qing a warm embrace the moment they met. "Fu Qing," he said warmly, "the most successful investment I have ever made in my entire life was 2 years ago, when I gave you that 1 million on that rooftop." Uncle Zhao and Zhang Gongtu stood proudly behind him as well. One was the director of engineering and the other the director of security. As the banquet began, Fu Qing took the stage as the host. He reminded everyone that 2 years ago, when he stood in this very spot, the ground beneath his feet was nothing but ruins. He admitted that back then, he felt as though the whole world had abandoned him. But today, he stood there once again. Now, he was standing at the most prosperous heart of the entire airport New City. He told the crowd that he had something important to say. He believed that what determines our value is never which line we are drawn outside of by others. Instead, it is where we choose to draw our own new starting line. Even if the world abandons you, you can choose to welcome the world back on your own terms. His speech was brief, a rare thing for such events. Yet it earned the most enthusiastic applause of the night. Before the banquet even ended, he took Su Wan's hand and they quietly slipped out. They changed into casual clothes, walking through the park like any ordinary couple. We see children laughing and playing nearby, and elderly people exercising. Suddenly, he spotted a familiar figure. Lin Shen was there, taking his young grandson down a slide. Lin Shen looked awkward and restless when he saw him, stammering that Fu Qing really was a big boss now, unlike before. Lin Shen apologized for his past loose talk, asking him not to take it to heart. He simply shook his head, as those days were long gone. At that moment, the little grandson ran over and looked at him with curiosity. Lin Shen quickly told the boy that this man was the pride of their new city. He introduced him as the president of the Cloud Hotel, telling the child that when he grew up, he should be just as successful as President Fu. He smiled, handed a piece of candy to the child, and they continued their walk until they reached the site where his old home once stood. Today, that spot had been transformed into a beautiful rooftop garden within the hotel complex. We see him and Suwon sitting together on a garden bench. In the distance, a massive airliner was slowly descending toward the runway, its lights streaking across the night sky like a falling star. Suddenly, Suwon spoke up. She asked him if he had any regrets. He looked at the plane landing smoothly and gazed out at the thousands of lights from the homes in the distance. Looking at the woman he loved by his side, he whispered softly that he had never regretted a single thing. And truly, who could blame him?